The dust, a fine ochre powder, coated everything. It shimmered in the afternoon sun, a golden haze that softened the sharp edges of the distant mountains and lent a dreamlike quality to the parched landscape. Amelia watched it cling to the hems of her travel dress, to the worn leather of her single suitcase, even to the strands of hair escaping her braid. It was a tangible presence, a constant reminder of how far she was from the manicured lawns and neat cobblestones of her former life. Noah hadn't spoken since they'd left the small station town, a 2-hour journey that felt like a silent odyssey across an alien world. His profile, etched against the glaring sky, was a study in stillness. A strong jawline, a hawkish nose, and eyes that seemed permanently fixed on a point beyond the horizon. Distant eyes, she thought, even when they weren't looking away. They rounded a bend, and a cluster of low-slung, sun-bleached buildings appeared. The ranch. It wasn't the sprawling estate she'd pictured from his terse letters, but a collection of weathered wood and corrugated iron, nestled precariously against a scrub-covered rise. A single, gnarled mesquite tree stood sentinel near a corral, its branches twisted like arthritic fingers. A faint wisp of smoke curled from a stone chimney. It looked less like a home and more like a stubborn outpost. Noah pulled the wagon to a halt, the creak of the wheels echoing in the sudden quiet. He didn't immediately move to help her down. Instead, he simply dismounted, his movements economical and fluid, and walked to the back of the wagon, retrieving her trunk. Amelia, feeling a tremor of unease, swung her legs over the side and dropped lightly to the dusty ground. The air was hot and dry, carrying the faint, earthy scent of sun-baked soil and something else, something wild and untamed. "This is it," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of inflection. He gestured vaguely with his head towards the main building. "The house." Amelia followed his gaze. The structure was plain, functional. A porch, half collapsed in one corner, offered little invitation. Her heart, which had been a hopeful flutter for months, now felt like a lead weight. This wasn't the idyllic future she'd envisioned. This was stark reality, unadorned and unapologetic. "It's remote," she managed, the understatement feeling weak even to her own ears. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything or nothing. He carried her trunk with surprising ease, heading towards the house. Amelia picked up her suitcase and followed, her shoes crunching on the loose gravel. Inside, the house was dim and cool, a welcome respite from the glare. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and dust, mingled with a faint metallic tang. The main room was sparsely furnished. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a stone hearth, and a sagging armchair. No curtains on the windows, just bare panes offering glimpses of the relentless landscape. It felt less like a home and more like a place to simply exist. He dropped her trunk in a corner. "The kitchen's through there," he indicated with a nod towards a doorway, "and the bedroom's off the hall." Amelia stood awkwardly in the center of the room, her small suitcase still clutched in her hand. "My room?" she asked, a sliver of hope igniting. Perhaps there was a separate space. He turned, his eyes finally meeting hers. They were a startling shade of hazel, flecked with gold, and they held an ancient sorrow that made her breath catch. "There's only one bedroom," he said, his voice flat. "It's yours. I'll sleep out here." He gestured to the armchair, a gesture that spoke volumes about his ingrained habit of self-sacrifice, or perhaps self-punishment. The implication hung heavy in the air. For months, their letters had spoken of marriage, of a shared life. Now, he was offering her a room in his house while he took the uncomfortable chair. It was a clear demarcation, a wall built of unspoken words and distant eyes. A wave of exhaustion, emotional and physical, washed over her. The long journey, the crushing disappointment, the man who was both stranger and intended. It was all too much. "Noah," she began, her voice softer than she intended. "We need to talk." He merely nodded, a curt, almost dismissive movement. He walked to the hearth, picked up a poker, and began to prod at the embers within, creating a shower of sparks that momentarily illuminated the grim set of his features. The silence stretched, filled only by the whisper of the wind outside and the faint crackle of the embers. He wasn't avoiding her gaze now. He was simply not offering it. He was present, yet miles away. And in that moment, Amelia knew, with a chilling certainty, that breaking through his walls would be far more difficult than she had ever imagined. The dust outside felt less like a nuisance and more like a mirror, reflecting the barren landscape of their nascent relationship. She finally put down her suitcase. Her fingers trembled slightly as she smoothed the wrinkles from her dress. The reality of her decision, of leaving everything behind for this man, hit her with a force that stole her breath. Had she made the worst mistake of her life? The question hung in the quiet, a stark echo in the vast, empty space. The unseen wall. The scent of dust and old wood clung to Amelia's clothes, a stark reminder of the long drive and the even longer journey ahead. She had unpacked the bare essentials, her floral dresses and city shoes looking comically out of place in the rustic wardrobe. Noah had disappeared after showing her the room, leaving her alone with the unsettling quiet and the hum of the ancient refrigerator downstairs. The silence, initially a welcome balm after the city's ceaseless thrum, now felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken words. She found him later, hunched over a workbench in a cluttered shed, the metallic tang of oil and something else, a faint, earthy smell, hanging in the air. He was meticulously cleaning a rusty piece of farm equipment, his strong hands moving with a practiced grace that belied the grimy task. The low sun, filtering through a grimy window, cast his profile in sharp relief, highlighting the deep lines etched around his eyes and the stubborn set of his jaw. He didn't look up as she entered, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. It was as if she were a ghost, an echo in the vast, empty space of his life. "Noah?" she ventured, her voice feeling thin and reedy in the cavernous shed. He paused, a wrench clattering softly against the metal. His gaze, when it finally met hers, was guarded, distant. "Something wrong?" "No, just looking for you." The words felt inadequate, a flimsy bridge over the chasm forming between them. She watched him, a knot tightening in her stomach. "I thought maybe we could talk." He grunted, turning back to his work. "Talk about what?" "About us. About everything." The air thickened with her unspoken questions. "Why did you bring me here? What do you want? What are we doing?" He continued to tinker, the rhythmic scrape of metal against metal the only response. The silence stretched, becoming an almost physical presence. Amelia felt a hot flush creep up her neck. This wasn't the man of the letters, the thoughtful, insightful writer whose words had painted a future of shared dreams. This was a stranger, encased in a shell of his own making. "Noah, please," she said, her voice laced with an unfamiliar edge of desperation. I left everything for this, for you. I need to understand. He finally straightened, wiping his hands on a grimy rag. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held hers for a long moment. There's nothing to understand, Amelia. This is my life. It's not much, but it's honest. He gestured vaguely around the shed, then out the open door towards the rolling, sun-baked landscape. And you're here. Is that all I am? Just here? The words tumbled out, sharper than she intended. She saw a flicker in his eyes, something akin to surprise, quickly masked. He sighed, a heavy, world-weary sound. What do you want me to say? I want you to talk to me, to let me in. The letters, they made me believe you wanted a partner, a wife, not just a presence. Her voice trembled, betraying the fragile hope she still clung to. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, a gesture of exasperation. Letters are one thing, reality is another. This ranch, it takes everything. There's no room for frills, for expectations. So I'm an expectation? She shot back, hurt and anger warring within her. He turned away, picking up another tool. Look, I'm tired. There's always work to be done. We can talk later. It was a dismissal, plain and simple. Amelia stood there, rooted to the spot, a cold dread seeping into her bones. The unseen wall she had vaguely sensed was now undeniably present, towering between them, impenetrable. He wasn't just emotionally distant. He was actively pushing her away, retreating into his fortress of solitude. As she walked back to the house, the vastness of the landscape seemed to mock her, mirroring the emptiness she felt inside. The romantic dream she had nursed for months had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, leaving her stranded in a reality colder and harsher than she could have ever imagined. The only sound was the crunch of her own footsteps on the dry earth, each one echoing the growing chasm between her and the man she had traveled so far to marry. Later, in the quiet solitude of her room, a strange thought surfaced. She had expected a challenge, a new life, perhaps even a struggle to adapt. But she had never anticipated this silent, passive resistance. He wasn't cruel, not overtly. He was simply absent. And in that absence, Amelia realized, lay a formidable opponent. It wasn't a battle of wills she faced, but a siege against a man who had perfected the art of disappearing even while standing right in front of you. The question now wasn't just if she could break through his walls, but if she had the strength and the will to even try. The answer, at that moment, felt terrifyingly uncertain. She spent the rest of the evening in her room, the silence punctuated only by the mournful hoot of an owl outside. Her dinner, a simple plate of stew Noah had left on the table, sat untouched. The food, once a symbol of the domesticity she craved, now felt like another barrier. He had provided sustenance, but not connection. She finally drifted off to sleep. The unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the rustle of wind through dry grass, the distant cry of a coyote, weaving through her troubled dreams. She was here, in this remote, forgotten place, And the man who had brought her here remained an enigma. His heart, a locked room she couldn't find the key to. The next morning, she awoke to the smell of strong coffee. Noah was already gone. Trapped by the storm. The sky, bruised purple and gray, mirrored the landscape of Amelia's heart. She watched the first fat drops of rain splatter against the dusty window pane of the small guest room Noah had pointed her towards. It was a utilitarian space, stark white walls and a narrow bed. A clear message of temporary lodging, not a shared future. Her suitcase sat unopened on the floor, a silent accusation of the dreams she'd packed. A low rumble vibrated through the floorboards, followed by the distant wail of the wind. Noah, still covered in the faint scent of earth and something metallic from the shed, hadn't offered to help her unpack, or even to offer a meal. He'd simply grunted about needing to check the fence line before the storm hit. His face, etched with a fatigue she hadn't recognized in his carefully crafted letters, was now permanently set in a mask of guarded indifference. Hours crawled by. The rain intensified, drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof. Amelia found a half-empty bag of pretzels in her tote bag and nibbled them, the salty crunch doing little to soothe the gnawing emptiness inside her. She paced the small room, then moved to the living area, a space dominated by a stone fireplace and shelves overflowing with dusty, well-worn books. It was here, amongst the faded spines and the quiet ticking of a grandfather clock, that she truly felt the profound solitude Noah had cultivated. No photographs, no trinkets, just books and the stark necessities of a bachelor's life. Another flash of lightning, closer this time, illuminated the ranch house in a stark white strobe. The power flickered, then died, plunging the house into a sudden, inky blackness. Amelia gasped, a reflexive sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "Noah?" she called out, her voice thin against the rising howl of the wind. No answer. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at her. She fumbled for her phone, the screen a useless rectangle of black. The storm wasn't just a passing shower. It was a full-blown tempest, battering the old ranch house with an almost malevolent force. The windows rattled violently, and she could hear branches scraping against the exterior walls. She edged her way through the darkness, her hands outstretched, until she bumped into a sturdy wooden table. "Noah!" she tried again, louder this time, a tremor in her voice. A beam of light cut through the gloom, illuminating Noah's silhouette in the doorway of what she assumed was his bedroom. He held a large, old-fashioned lantern. Its warm yellow glow softened the harsh lines of his face, making him appear less formidable, more human. "Power's out," he stated, his voice calm, almost emotionless, as if he'd expected it. "Happens. Stay inside. It's getting bad out there." "I can hear that," Amelia retorted, her frustration bubbling to the surface. The sound of the wind was a banshee's shriek now, and a loud crack, like a rifle shot, reverberated through the house, followed by the sickening thud of something heavy hitting the ground outside. Noah's jaw tightened. He walked over to the fireplace, set the lantern on the mantel, and began to expertly lay kindling. The simple, practiced movements were a stark contrast to his earlier aloofness. He didn't ask if she was okay, didn't offer comfort, just moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long years spent alone, facing nature's whims. "What was that sound?" Amelia asked, her voice hushed. "Tree branch," he grunted, striking a match. A small flame blossomed, catching the dry wood, and soon a comforting crackle filled the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The heat, though still nascent, was a welcome reprieve from the chill that had begun to seep into the old house. He stood, dusting his hands off on his worn jeans. "Might be a while. Storms like this, they cut off the main road sometimes. Best to just ride it out." Amelia wrapped her arms around herself, trying to suppress a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Trapped. Not just by the storm, but by the impenetrable wall Noah had erected between them. The irony was not lost on her. She'd come all this way seeking connection, only to find herself more isolated than ever, with only the roar of the wind and the unsettling presence of a man who seemed determined to remain a stranger. Her romantic dream hadn't just shattered. It had been swept away by the raging torrent outside, leaving her stranded on an island of unspoken regrets. "You have any food?" she asked, the question feeling absurdly small in the face of the raging storm. Noah turned, his eyes dark in the dim light, meeting hers for a fleeting moment. A flicker of something unreadable passed through them. "Sure, come on." He picked up the lantern, its glow casting their elongated shadows on the wall as he led her towards the kitchen, towards the uncertain shelter of the storm and their even more uncertain future. A trembling question. The wind keened a desolate cry around the ranch house, rattling the window panes like a frantic drummer. Amelia huddled in the lamplight's waver, the room's oppressive hush broken only by the storm's ferocity and the faint scuff of Noah's return from the kitchen. He materialized with a chipped enamel mug of lukewarm coffee, its acrid steam doing little to thaw the glacial silence between them. He set it on the sturdy oak table with a thud that resonated with the leaden weight in her own chest. "There's not much else," he grunted, his gaze riveted to the storm-lashed darkness beyond the glass. He hadn't truly met her eyes since her arrival. Amelia's fingers, a fragile cage, closed around the mug, the ceramic offering scant solace. The tempest had escalated, if such a thing were possible. Rain hammered the house with the force of flung shrapnel, and the wind shrieked like a banshee in torment. Each gust seemed to flay another layer from her carefully constructed hope, leaving her exposed and raw. She had envisioned countless scenarios for their first evening, but none held this stifling quiet, this emotional barrenness. I should probably get my bags inside," she managed, her voice a thin thread against the gale's roar. It was a transparent excuse to puncture the silence, a desperate lunge for a semblance of normalcy. Her duffel and small trunk remained in the truck bed, undoubtedly drenched by now. Noah merely grunted again, a non-committal sound that tightened the knot of dread in her stomach. "No point. Everything's soaked anyway. We'll see to it in the morning if the storm breaks." He spoke without turning, his back a formidable, unyielding fortress. A cold wave of despair washed over Amelia. This wasn't the man from the letters. The eloquent, tender words she'd treasured, the subtle vulnerability woven into his descriptions of the land and his quiet aspirations. They now felt like a cruel deception, This man was a stranger, a stoic figure carved from the harsh landscape itself. The lamp on the table flickered precariously, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that distorted the familiar objects in the room. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, racked Amelia's frame. She had to speak, anything to break the slow strangulation of this silence. "Noah," she began, her voice a bare whisper, but the sudden lull in the wind's assault carried it across the expanse. He stiffened, then slowly, reluctantly, turned. His eyes, dark pools in the dim light, finally met hers for the first time since she'd stepped from her truck. There was no welcome, no spark of recognition, only a weary resignation that pierced her to the bone. "Yes?" His tone was flat, devoid of warmth. Amelia swallowed, her throat suddenly parched. This was it, the moment she dreaded, the inevitable confrontation. Her heart drummed a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The letters, they painted a different picture. The words felt clumsy, inadequate, yet they were undeniably true. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He didn't refute it. He offered no explanation. He simply stood, a formidable, immovable presence. I don't understand," she pressed on, despite the mounting trepidation. I thought we had a connection. I thought you wanted me here." The final words were a plea, a desperate gasp for air in the suffocating atmosphere. His gaze dropped, fixing on a point just beyond her shoulder. "Things change," he rumbled, his voice rougher now, like stones grinding together. "But what changed?" she insisted, her voice rising with a fragile indignation. "Was it me? Did I make a mistake coming here?" Her voice cracked on the last word, the question a raw, trembling wound. Noah finally looked at her again, and for a fleeting instant, a flicker of something unreadable, pain, regret, crossed his features before he swiftly shuddered it away. He ran a hand through his dark, unruly hair, a gesture of exasperation or distress. She couldn't discern which. "No, Amelia, it's not you." His voice was softer now, though still distant. This life, it's not for everyone. It's not what you think it is." He gestured vaguely around the stark living room, the encroaching darkness from outside a palpable weight. The letters, they were a different time, a different me, perhaps. His words were a blunt instrument, shattering the last fragments of her dream. The storm outside seemed to echo the tempest raging within her. The quiet man she had fallen for through his prose was a phantom, and in his stead stood a stranger, a man who had erected walls so high she doubted anything could scale them. And suddenly, the choice before her was stark. Remain and try to chip away at those walls, or admit defeat and leave, her heart irrevocably broken. The trembling question she'd asked now hung heavy in the air, unanswered in any way that truly mattered. The fading light and a helping hand. The lantern's glow, meant to be a warm invitation, now stretched long. Skeletal fingers of shadow across the cabin's rough-hewn walls, mirroring the frigid distance that had materialized between them. Amelia remained rooted in the room's center, her travel satchel still clutched tight, the silence a leaden weight. Noah, after his startling confession, had retreated to the stone hearth, prodding the dying embers with a poker, his back a rigid, impenetrable barrier. I don't understand, Amelia finally uttered, her voice a fragile whisper against the rising wind's howl. What happened, Noah? Your letters, they painted a vibrant future, our future. He didn't turn. Letters are just ink on paper, Amelia. Life out here, it's a different beast. His tone was stark, stripped of the tenderness she'd once read in his script. Disillusionment, sharp and acrid, flooded her mouth. She had journeyed across continents, braved vast oceans, all for just words. A profound weariness, born from days of travel and now compounded by this crushing blow, swept over her, her shoulders slumping. And why did you ask me to come? This raw, direct challenge finally elicited a reaction. Noah pivoted, his face etched with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher, perhaps regret, perhaps simple exhaustion. The firelight danced in his eyes, deepening their newfound remoteness. I don't know. He raked a hand through his dark, disheveled hair. I thought, maybe I could. But seeing you here, it's not fair. Amelia felt a sharp, desperate urge to flee, to rewind time to before his first letter had ever graced her hands. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the tremor in her fingers. When she reopened them, her gaze fell upon the travel-worn leather of her bag, a stark testament to her wasted journey. She lowered it gently to the floor. Well, I'm here now, she declared, the words like ash on her tongue. And I'm not leaving tonight. Where can I put my things? Noah gestured vaguely towards an unmade cot in the corner, piled with utilitarian blankets. There's a spare bed. He offered no help, no eye contact. Amelia crossed to the cot. The mattress was thin, the blankets coarse. It was a purely functional space, devoid of any personal warmth. Slowly, she unlatched her bag, extracting a simple nightgown and a small toiletry kit. The mundane act felt profoundly significant, a quiet, unwanted assertion of her temporary presence. She could feel Noah's presence behind her, a heavy, uncomfortable pressure. The wind outside intensified, rattling the single window pane. A sudden, violent gust tore through a loose shutter, sending a splintering crack echoing through the cabin. Rain, a steady patter moments before, now hammered against the roof. Noah, startled from his brooding, moved instinctively. He snatched a hammer and nails from a toolbox near the door. "Stay back," he muttered, brushing past her. He climbed onto a rickety stool, struggling to secure the shutter in the dim light. The wind fought him, buffeting the wooden panel, threatening to rip it free entirely. Amelia watched, a strange cocktail of resentment and an unfamiliar concern stirring within her. He was clumsy, his movements stiff with cold and perhaps his own internal turmoil. Without conscious thought, she stepped forward, raising the lantern higher. The added light illuminated his fumbling hands and the dark lines of strain around his mouth. He glanced at her, surprised, but offered no protest. The proximity was unexpected, a tiny fissure in the wall he'd constructed. With the improved illumination, he managed to drive the nails home, securing the shutter against the storm's furious assault. He descended, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "Thanks," he mumbled, still avoiding her gaze. It was a small word, barely audible above the storm's roar, but it was the first human connection they'd shared since her arrival. The air between them, though still thick with unspoken tension, felt a fraction less glacial. Outside the now secured window, the last vestiges of twilight surrendered to the deep, impenetrable black of the stormy night. Yet within Amelia, a flicker of something, a tiny, tentative hope, stirred. It was fragile, easily extinguished, but undeniably present. The persistent scent of pine resin clung to everything in the small, sparsely furnished cabin. Amelia traced the grain of the rough-hewn table with a finger, the wood cool beneath her touch. A single, intricately carved wooden bird sat in the center, its wings outstretched as if caught mid-flight. It was the only decorative item in the room, a stark contrast to the utilitarian surroundings. She wondered who had carved it, and why it was here. Noah was outside, the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood echoing faintly from beyond the small, grimy window. He'd barely spoken since they'd fixed the shutter, disappearing into the cold morning with a mumbled apology about chores. Her hands, still smarting from the raw wood and sharp metal of the shutter, moved to unpack the rest of her trunk. Each item she placed in the empty dresser drawers felt like a small act of defiance. A silk scarf, a splash of color against the drab interior, was draped over the back of a stiff wooden chair. A small silver-framed photograph of her mother, smiling broadly in a sun-drenched garden, found a place on the bedside table. It was a silent assertion of her own life, her own history, in this place that felt so entirely Noah's. Hours later, the cabin was filled with the aroma of simmering beans and strong coffee. Noah hadn't returned for lunch, and Amelia, fueled by a mixture of stubbornness and hunger, had started cooking. When the door finally creaked open, admitting a gust of frigid air and the man himself, he stopped just inside, his gaze sweeping over the cabin's transformed interior. His eyes lingered on the scarf, then the photograph, before settling on her. There was a flicker there, something unreadable, before his expression settled back into its customary stoicism. "Smells good," he offered, his voice a low rumble. He shed his heavy work coat, revealing a faded flannel shirt stretched taut across his broad shoulders. He walked to the sink, pumping water into a basin to wash his hands, the movements practiced and economical. "There's plenty," she said, gesturing to the pot on the cast-iron stove. "I figured you'd be hungry." He nodded, drying his hands on a rough towel before sitting at the table. He picked up the wooden bird, his thumb stroking its smooth surface. "My mother carved this," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "She was good with her hands." He set it back down, carefully, as if it were fragile. Amelia felt a sudden, unexpected pang. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely. "You never mentioned she was artistic." He shrugged, picking up a spoon. "There's a lot I didn't mention." The old wall was back up, firm and unyielding. The brief window into his past, into something personal, had slammed shut. They ate in silence, the clinking of spoons against stoneware the only sound. The beans were hearty, the coffee strong, but the meal felt like a performance, each chewing and swallowing a deliberate act in a play they hadn't rehearsed. Amelia watched him, trying to decipher the subtle shifts in his posture, the way his jaw worked. He wasn't looking at her, his gaze fixed on some invisible point beyond the window. Afterward, as Amelia cleared the table, she broke the silence. "Noah, we need to talk about everything. About why I'm here, what you told me in those letters. He turned slowly, his eyes finally meeting hers. They were the color of a winter sky, deep and unyielding. I told you. Amelia, I needed help. I was lonely. I romanticized things, I suppose, made them out to be more than they were. His words were clipped, devoid of emotion, a recitation. Her temper, long suppressed, began to simmer. Romanticized? You wrote about a future, Noah, about a partnership, a life together. That wasn't romanticizing, that was lying. You made me leave everything. Her voice rose with each word, the indignation finally breaking through her carefully constructed calm. He pushed his chair back, the scrape loud in the small cabin. I didn't lie, Amelia, not intentionally. I just hoped it could be different. But this life isn't for everyone. It's hard. And I'm not what you think I am. He walked to the door, pulling on his coat. And what exactly do you think I think you are? She challenged, her voice trembling now with a mixture of anger and hurt. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. He looked at the wooden bird on the table, then back at her, his expression grim. Someone who can be fixed. Someone who needs saving. I don't. Not anymore. With that, he stepped out, pulling the door shut behind him, leaving Amelia alone once more with the lingering scent of pine and the silent wooden bird. The wind outside picked up, rattling the newly secured shutter, a mournful, solitary sound. A night of shared worry. The oppressive quiet Noah left behind descended upon Amelia like a physical weight. The cabin, once a beacon of shared aspiration, now felt like a gilded cage. Though he'd been gone mere minutes, the void he created was already crushing. Her gaze snagged on the carved wooden bird on the mantelpiece, its wings frozen in an eternal, silent flight. A beautiful, intricate piece, a testament to a mother's affection. It now stood sentinel in a room suddenly too large. The brief flicker of his past, the unexpected softness in his voice when speaking of his mother, had vanished, replaced by his familiar, impenetrable wall. A tremor, akin to fear though she refused to label it so, snaked through her. She'd fled her own past, a haven of comfort but devoid of deeper meaning. Was this stark isolation the price of seeking something more profound? She moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool pane. The ranch spread out before her, a tapestry of faded greens and browns under the deepening twilight. No sign of Noah, only the wind, a restless whisper across the plains. An hour crawled by, the sky bruised to a deep purple, yet Noah remained absent. The logical part of her brain, her usual anchor, offered reassurances. He was a rancher, intimately familiar with this land, likely just clearing his head, mending a distant fence. But a more primal instinct gnawed at her composure. The air grew chill, and a shiver traced its way down her spine. She coaxed a fire to life in the hearth, its crackling warmth doing little to dispel the internal cold. A half-eaten plate of stew sat on the table, a stark testament to their fractured meal. She should eat, but her stomach rebelled. The silence was broken only by the mournful lament of a distant coyote, a sound that seemed to echo her own burgeoning unease. Another hour passed. Darkness had utterly consumed the landscape. The oil lamp cast erratic shadows on the cabin walls, transforming familiar objects into unsettling, distorted shapes. She paced the small living room, her footsteps absorbed by the worn rug. What if something had happened? The thought, previously dismissed, now clung to her like stubborn burrs. He hadn't specified his destination, simply stormed out, leaving her to navigate the wreckage of their conversation. Just as panic began to truly take root, the distant rumble of an engine reached her. Faint at first, barely a vibration on the still air, it steadily grew louder. Relief, sharp and sudden, flooded through her, making her knees weak. She rushed to the door, pulling it open just as the pickup sound swelled. Noah's truck, a shadowy behemoth, pulled to a stop. Its headlights cleaved the gloom, momentarily blinding her. The engine died, plunging the yard back into darkness save for the spill of lamplight from the cabin. He emerged from the driver's side, a stiff silhouette against the night sky. "Noah," she managed, her voice a fragile tremor. He didn't respond immediately, simply walked towards her, his gaze unreadable in the dimness. He cradled something small and dark in his arms. As he drew closer, she saw it was a lamb, a tiny, shivering bundle. "One of the ewes dropped early," he said, his voice rough, stripped of its earlier anger. "Found him half frozen." He moved past her into the cabin, heading straight for the warmth of the hearth. He knelt, carefully placing the lamb on a thick rug before the fire. Its tiny bleats were weak, almost imperceptible. Amelia watched, a knot of worry still tight in her chest, but now mingled with a different emotion. He was here. He was safe. And he held such fragility. Will it make it?" she whispered. Noah didn't look at her, his broad back a barrier. He gently stroked the lamb's matted wool. "He's got a chance. Needs to warm up, then we'll try to get some milk in him." She found herself kneeling beside him, the heat from the fire a welcome embrace. The lamb, no larger than a house cat, shivered uncontrollably. Its eyes were closed, its breath shallow. Noah's large, usually calloused hand was surprisingly tender as he stroked its head. The tension that had held her captive for hours slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a shared, unspoken concern for the tiny life shivering between them. The arguments, the emotional chasm, receded into the background. For a precious moment, they were simply two people, united by a small, vulnerable creature in the vast, indifferent night. The fire crackled, the only sound apart from the lamb's faint bleats and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the two adults. "He's beautiful," she said, her voice a soft murmur. Noah grunted, a sound that was neither disagreement nor affirmation. He shifted, adjusting the lamb's position, trying to cup its small body in his hands to impart more warmth. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the faint lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes, and a vulnerability she hadn't witnessed before. The air thickened with the unspoken history of the last few hours, but also with the fragile hope for a new beginning. The lamb's fragile bleating, a new thread in the vast quiet of the ranch house, had become Amelia's instinctual compass. 2 days had passed since Noah had carried the shivering creature inside, enough time for a new rhythm to settle between them. Her initial apprehension had softened, yielding to a shared, unspoken focus. They moved in synchronized orbits around the small, straw-filled box by the hearth. Despite her inexperience with livestock, Amelia discovered an unexpected aptitude for nurturing. She'd warm milk in a small pan, testing its warmth against her wrist before guiding the bottle to the lamb's eager mouth. Noah, meanwhile, operated with quiet efficiency, checking on the ewe, replenishing straw, and occasionally, with a gruffness that barely veiled his concern, querying, "Still taking the milk?" Their conversations, once strained and sparse, now orbited the lamb. "He finished the bottle," Amelia would report, a triumphant lilt in her voice, or, "He's finally asleep." Noah would nod, his gaze lingering on the tiny form, a flicker of something unreadable in his deep-set eyes. One evening, as twilight painted the windows in hues of bruised purple and deep indigo, Amelia sat cross-legged beside the box, gently stroking the lamb's soft wool. Noah was at the stove, stirring a pot of stew, the mingled aromas of herbs and simmering meat perfuming the air. The silence wasn't empty. It was woven with the soft crackle of the fire, the lamb's faint breathing, and the steady rhythm of Noah's stirring spoon. "He seems stronger today," Amelia murmured, more to herself than to him. Noah turned, the wooden spoon still in his hand. "He is." His voice was low, a gentle rumble. He moved closer, his shadow falling over her and the lamb, then knelt, his large hand surprisingly tender as he touched the lamb's head. "Lost a good many of them over the years. Some just don't have the fight." Amelia truly saw him then. The lamplight etched the lines around his eyes, highlighted the faint stubble on his jaw. She perceived not just the rancher, but a man burdened by quiet losses, by the relentless, defining cycle of life and death. "It's hard, isn't it?" she asked, her voice hushed. He drew a breath, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "Some things are harder than others." He rose abruptly, returning to the stove. The air thickened with an unspoken sorrow, a subtle yet pervasive grief that seemed to emanate from him. Later, after their near-silent meal, the lamb's frail health a fragile bridge between them, Amelia found sleep elusive. She rose and padded softly into the living area. Noah remained in his armchair, not reading, but staring into the dying embers. The room had cooled, the fire's warmth ebbing. "Can't sleep?" she whispered. He turned his head slowly. "No." His voice was rough, edged with an unfamiliar vulnerability. Amelia hesitated, then settled on the rug near the hearth, maintaining a respectful distance. "Noah," she began, her voice a bare whisper. "Your letters, they didn't prepare me for this. For you." He flinched, a subtle tightening of his jaw. He remained silent, his gaze fixed on the embers. "They were kind, even hopeful. They painted a picture of something different," she continued, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. "They made me believe in a future that felt warmer." A long moment passed, thick with unspoken truths. Then Noah let out a ragged sigh. "They weren't my letters, Amelia." The confession hung in the air, a cold, sharp shard of ice. Amelia's breath hitched. "What?" He finally turned to face her fully, his eyes shadowed yet intensely focused. My sister wrote them, Sarah, after the accident. His voice was barely audible, etched with a pain so profound it seemed to steal the oxygen from the room. She thought I needed someone, thought I was breaking. The world tilted. The kind words, the gentle promises, the hope she had clung to, all a fabrication. A sister's desperate attempt to save her brother from himself. The realization hit Amelia like a physical blow, stripping away the last vestiges of her carefully constructed dream. Yet beneath the shock and betrayal, a different emotion stirred, a profound, aching pity for the man before her. The silence that followed wasn't empty, but filled with the ghost of a woman Amelia had never known, and the crushing weight of a grief that had sculpted Noah into the hardened man he was. The lamb stirred in its box, a soft, hopeful bleat, echoing in the sudden, shattering stillness. The confession hung in the air, a phantom limb severed from Amelia's carefully constructed future. Noah's gaze, usually guarded, now held a raw vulnerability that twisted her gut. He turned away, his broad shoulders hunching, as if the weight of his revelation was too much to bear. The fire in the hearth crackled, a mocking counterpoint to the sudden chill that had permeated the room. Your sister, Amelia finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. The words felt foreign on her tongue, tainted by the deception. All this time, I thought... She trailed off, the full scope of his betrayal washing over her. The tender letters, the shared dreams, the carefully painted picture of a man yearning for companionship. All of it was a lie. A cruel mirage. Noah remained silent, his back still to her, a solid, unyielding wall. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until Amelia couldn't stand it anymore. She rose. The protest of the wooden floorboards a loud accusation in the quiet room. Why, Noah? Why let me believe it? Her voice cracked, a fragile sound in the vastness of the ranch house. He finally turned, his eyes shadowed, his jaw tight. She wanted me to have a life, Amelia. After the accident, after everything, she thought I was just giving up. His voice was rough, edged with a grief that went beyond the lamb, beyond even the letters. It was a deep, ancient sorrow etched into the very lines of his face. She thought if someone came, someone like you, it would fix things. Amelia scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Fix things? By tricking me into coming here? To a place where I know no one? To a man who can barely look me in the eye? The anger, hot and sharp, finally broke through her shock. Do you have any idea what I gave up? My job, my apartment, my friends, everything. He flinched, a subtle tremor in his powerful frame. I know, he said, the word a mere breath. And I tried to tell her to stop, but she was stubborn. She said you wouldn't come if it was just me. She said I was too broken. The last word was a confession, a wound he rarely exposed. The raw honesty in his voice, the admission of his brokenness, pierced through Amelia's anger, leaving a gaping hole of unexpected empathy. She sank back into the armchair, her fury deflating, replaced by a weary resignation. Where is she now? Noah hesitated, his gaze drifting to the window, where the first stars were beginning to prick the darkening sky. She's gone, Amelia. Almost 2 years now. The same accident that took my parents. She was with them. The revelation hit Amelia with the force of a physical blow. The unspoken grief, the profound isolation, the heavy silence that permeated Noah's life. It all coalesced into a devastatingly clear picture. He wasn't just emotionally distant. He was adrift, a survivor haunted by a triple tragedy. The letters, then, were not just a deception, but a desperate, albeit misguided, act of love from a sister who wanted to see her brother live again. A different kind of sadness settled over Amelia, a profound sympathy that eclipsed her earlier anger. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a deceitful man, but a man utterly alone, consumed by a sorrow he didn't know how to articulate. "Noah," she began, her voice softer now, tinged with a compassion she hadn't known she possessed. I'm so sorry." He simply nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his head. The weight of his grief, a silent companion, seemed to fill the room, pressing down on them both. The quiet understanding that passed between them was more potent than any shouted argument. It was a shared moment of profound sadness, a recognition of each other's wounds. The next morning, the world outside seemed to mirror the muted atmosphere within the house. A thick mist clung to the valley, obscuring the distant peaks and painting the familiar landscape in shades of gray. Amelia found Noah in the barn, his movements methodical as he checked on the ewes. She watched him for a moment, the rhythmic scrape of his shovel against the stone floor a stark contrast to the tumultuous thoughts in her mind. "I need to go into town," she announced, her voice steadier than she felt. "For supplies. And to think." He paused, leaning on the shovel, his eyes meeting hers. There was no argument, no attempt to dissuade her, just a slow, understanding nod. "The truck's got a full tank. Take the old one. It's more reliable." The gesture, small and practical, spoke volumes. He wasn't trying to keep her, wasn't trying to control her. He was giving her space, a freedom she hadn't expected. The drive into town was a blur of gray roads and silent contemplation. The ranch, usually a symbol of her dashed hopes, now felt like a place of raw, aching grief. She spent the better part of the day wandering the aisles of the small general store, picking up essentials, her mind replaying Noah's confession. His sister's desperate hope, his own profound loss. The way he had carried that burden alone for so long. As dusk began to settle, she found herself at the edge of town, looking out over the expansive valley. The mist had begun to lift, revealing the distant, purple-hued mountains. A new horizon, literally and figuratively, was emerging. She thought of the lamb, now stronger, nursing vigorously from its mother. She thought of Noah, the quiet strength beneath his sorrow, the unexpected vulnerability he had shown. The choice, she realized, was no longer about her romanticized dreams, but about something far more fundamental. Could she build a life here? Not with the man from the letters, but with the real Noah. Could she offer him companionship, a quiet understanding, a balm for his wounded soul? The thought was daunting, terrifying even, but it also held a strange, undeniable pull. When she returned to the ranch, the porch light was on. a beacon in the encroaching darkness. Noah was sitting on the porch swing, a silhouette against the warm glow. He didn't speak as she approached, but his gaze, when she met it, held a question, a flicker of hope that mirrored her own nascent feelings. "I got the feed you wanted," she said, pulling a sack of grain from the truck. He rose, taking the sack from her with a quiet grunt of thanks. For a long moment they stood there, the silence between them no longer heavy with deceit, but pregnant with unspoken possibilities. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Above them, the stars had begun to emerge, brilliant pinpricks in the inky sky, offering a new kind of light, a new horizon. "Amelia," he said, his voice a low rumble, breaking the stillness. I didn't want to hurt you." She looked up at him, into eyes that held a depth of pain and a glimmer of something else. A fragile connection, a tentative invitation. "I know, Noah," she whispered. And for the first time since arriving at the ranch, she truly believed it. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't a mistake after all. Perhaps it was a beginning.